Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrill, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
Welcome to a new series on the Workology podcast that we are kicking off that focuses on the future of work. This series is in collaboration with the Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology, or PEAT. You can learn more about PEAT at peatworks.org. Everywhere I turn, there seems to be conversations in the human resources and recruiting industry centered around artificial intelligence. It truly is permeating our landscape. However, myself, along with PEAT, we wondered if AI was as inclusive as it was supposed to be, or as it could be. We're talking about digging deep and looking at inclusiveness of machine learning technology and exploring the implications for people with disabilities. Today I'm joined with Dr. Yuta Trevenis. She is the Director of Inclusive Design Research Center and a professor at OCAD University. Yuta has been working towards more inclusive and accessible technology for much of her life. Her focus is now on improving artificial intelligence systems so that they can better serve everyone, including with people with disabilities. And she also organizes hackathons towards this goal. Yuta, welcome to the Workology podcast.
Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about your background? Because I think it's really interesting and different than many of the guests on this podcast previously.
Okay, sure. I've been interested in the liberating potential and worried about the exclusionary risks of computers and networks and digital systems since the emergence of personal computers in the late 70s. I was working with a very, very diverse group of individuals at a university, and I felt that computers and networks and digital systems had the potential to be wonderful translators. So I worked in that particular field, getting to know the technology better, and I started the Inclusive Design Research Center in 1993 to proactively work to make sure that emerging socio-technical practices, new technologies, are inclusive of everyone. The team that I created, which continues and will be 25 years as of next June, is a very, very diverse distributed community with project partners all around the globe. We grew up with the web and have espoused open practices and community practices before I think even open was a common term. We moved to OCAD University in 2010, and I started a graduate program in inclusive design. And the graduate program is intended to pioneer a more diversity-supportive form of education. We're experimenting with inclusive education to prepare graduates for all of the variety of things that they're encountering and the many changes that are happening in our community. So one of the things I'd love to tell you about is our perspective on disability. At the IDRC, we define disability not as a personal trait, but as a mismatch between the needs of the individual and the service product or environment offered. So in that sense, we all experiencing disability when the system's not designed to match our needs. I'm hoping that we can see disability as a design issue that can be addressed not as a personal trait that creates an us-them scenario. And so designing our artificial intelligence and our HR systems and the way that we recruit in our workplace ultimately to be more inclusive means that we're creating it to be better for all of us and to ensure that fewer and fewer of us experience disabilities.
This is fascinating to me because you have been working in this area, this field, for 25 years. And I think long before maybe anyone had certainly thought about artificial intelligence, but really focused on inclusive technology and its use for a very long time.
Yes. Actually, 25 years ago, I started the center, but I started in this when the Apple II Plus emerged and Tandy Model 100 and all of those things that I'm sure very few people remember.
Can you talk to our podcast listeners about your work in artificial intelligence and disability inclusion?
Sure. I've been concerned about how diversity, human variability, and especially outliers fare in quantified data systems for some time. This predates our use of data in big data analytics and artificial intelligence. When we use or require big numbers of homogeneous outcomes to draw any conclusions, people with disabilities are often the casualties. If you take, say, the needs and characteristics of any group of people and plot them on a scatter plot, you get something like a starburst. It looks like an exploding star. In the middle, there will be a dense cluster, and then other needs and characteristics will spread out toward the periphery. People with disabilities are represented some distance from that dense core. And if you look at the needs and characteristics at the periphery, or where people with disabilities are in that starburst, you will see that they are much further apart, despite the fact that and this demonstrates that people with disabilities are more diverse than people in the center. But we tend to treat anyone beyond a certain invisible boundary away from the dense core the same. That huge variability between people with disabilities becomes a problem because it means that you can never muster the numbers to be seen as significant in quantified data systems, even though the people we relegate to the disability category are the world's largest minority, if not a majority. As far as quantified data, that requires statistical power, and that's what we've required in all of our data systems is concerned. People with disabilities are outliers and noise in the data set. And what we do with noise and with outliers is we eliminate it when we clean the data or when we norm the data. The difficulty with AI and why this becomes such a huge issue with AI is that AI bases its decisions on this data. And these are hugely important decisions that we don't question because we think that artificial intelligence is not biased, that it's objective, that it's not subject to human foibles. So what happens is that AI does not recognize or understand people with disabilities. People with disabilities don't appear in or fit the models machines use to make inferences. And worse than that, AI automates this bias against the outliers and amplifies it. If AI is a black box, we can't challenge the AI decisions. And so what is happening is that people with disabilities are being impacted in quite a number of pernicious ways. You were talking about HR and especially competitive HR decisions. We use AI to filter the applications to determine who's going to be the most promising candidate, who's going to get an interview. And if you're not part of the data set, there's no data about your positive performance. And so someone with a disability who is an outlier, who isn't part of the model, won't be selected. It, however, also permeates into other areas of our life, loans and credit, insurance. If your asset portfolio or profile is not something the machine is used to, it won't determine that you are a good loan risk. If you have an anomalous medical history, then insurance will not be something that will be decided to be a low risk. If there is a security assessment or someone is determining sentencing, predicting recidivism, flagging security risks, because you are unknown and something that is not part of what is part of the model or what is understood by the machine, then you're more likely to get flagged. And so what you have is a vicious cycle. You are not part of the data set. You're not understood. You're not therefore going to become part of the data set. So it's not a case of let's just add more data, because the problem is that all of that data is eliminating you. And so you'll never get an opportunity to be part of the data set.
This is fascinating because I feel like the sell in the human resources and recruiting industry for artificial intelligence is that it's going to remove bias and help make better, more consistent hiring decisions. But you're saying that it's eliminating an important group of people from even being considered for hire or promotion or any of these things related to the workplace.
Right, because it's based on past data. So it will perpetuate what has happened in the past. The evidence that someone has done well within a job will be based upon past data. And the anomalous data, most data brokerages will eliminate the anomalous data. They're trying to find the dominant patterns, the strongest, largest group, so that it can be a certain decision that is being made. And so in that way, it is eliminating what is seen as noise. But in fact, it's the individuals that are at the periphery of that scatter plot I was talking about, or people who are in small minorities.
So one of the areas that we've talked about throughout this Future of Work podcast series with PEAT is a look at the gig economy and some of these web-based platforms. And there's a lot of different platforms in human resources and recruiting, as well as the gig economy that use AI and machine learning components. How can these technologies do better at incorporating all different types of individuals outside of that scatter plot so that they aren't impacting those who are different and we're failing to bring those people into the community or giving them opportunities?
So platforms and the flexible economy, the sharing economy, holds a lot of promise for people who previously faced barriers to employment or who have difficulty participating in traditional employment. And they hold a great deal of promise for people with disabilities. When you are an outlier, it is hard to find someone nearby with the same needs that you have. You're subject to, as I was mentioning, these vicious economic cycles. Products are not made for you. If they are, they cost more, meaning your scarce dollars worth less. Education is not optimized for you. Work opportunities don't recognize your potential. If you're lucky enough to get a position, the tools you need to do your work won't be accessible, meaning you can't demonstrate your optimal performance. So that someone who has a disability and faces barriers to employment in the current job market, there's many things that you're needing to battle. Platforms are a potential way to support people in recognizing their diverse needs and thereby diversifying the demand as well, which can then help to trigger a diversification of production and supply. The more we push both the demand and the supply out to those edges, the better it is for inclusion and for people that are outliers. And it makes it provides more choices for everybody. And when there are more choices, then you can find choices that fit you, whether it's a product or whether it's a job or whether it's a service. So platforms can reduce fragmentation, allow the sharing and pooling of resources, which makes it easier to address the requirements of individuals who can't benefit from economies of scale. They also provide feedback loops to continuously refine available resources. And not only can tools and resources be shared, but also the building blocks or development tools needed to create things like inclusive products, support training of people that face barriers to employment, or to address gaps. However, I've been a great proponent of platforms for those reasons. But some of the platforms are largely extractive platforms. The value comes from the workers, but the workers don't govern the platform, nor do they receive the profit. Because the focus is on short-term competitive wealth production for the owners, these platforms are less likely to invest in diversification. Most of the AI products are used to have a quick win. Not only will people with disabilities fare badly in the predictive analytics, but as I was mentioning, if you are not participating, there won't be data that proves your successful performance. And the AI that is frequently used in these systems is to find the quickest way to address an immediate demand. There is an alternative And that is there's a platform co-op movements, and they are governed by workers, and the workers share the profit. They're motivated to create a thriving, diverse community. If you're interested in the greater social good, it pays to be as inclusive as possible. And so there is an evolution of some of these platforms, and there are these emergent platforms that are not looking at data to support the immediate quick win, but data to support a thriving community with diversification of jobs and better benefits for the workers, but also for the employers and for the consumers of the services.
Let's take a little bit of a reset. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill, and you're listening to the Workology podcast in partnership with PEAT. Today we are talking about machine learning and inclusion with Jutta Trevernis. You can connect with her on Twitter at Jutta, Jutta Trevira.
The Workology Podcast Future of Work series is supported by PEAT, the Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology. PEAT's initiative is to foster collaboration and action around accessible technology in the workplace. PEAT is funded by the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy, ODEP. Learn more about PEAT at peatworks.org. That's PEATWORKS.org.
At the Inclusive Research Center, you focus on 3 dimensions of inclusive design. Can you walk us through these and maybe talk about how they apply to machine learning and AI technologies?
Sure. So universal design has a set of principles, and accessibility has a checklist. And one of the things that I was encouraged to do was to come up with a set of principles for inclusive design. But inclusive design is intended to be relative to the individual. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's a one-size-fits-one approach, because we grew up in the digital domain, and the digital can be adaptive, unlike a building where you have to have the entrance work for everyone that might approach the building. A digital system can morph and adapt and present a different design to each one that visits that digital system. So instead of a set of principles, I devised the 3 dimensions. And the 3 dimensions are: the first dimension is that recognize that everybody's unique and help people to understand their own uniqueness and create systems that fit that unique diversity of requirements, or one size fits one. The second dimension is ensure that there is an inclusive process. This means designing the table so that everyone can participate in the decision-making and in the design, because we all benefit from diverse perspectives. We have far better planning, better prediction, much greater creativity if we have a diversity of perspectives participating in the design. And what you want in inclusive design is co-design, so authentic co-design, where the individual that the design is intended to be used by is part of the design process. And then the third dimension is recognize that we're in a complex adaptive system. No design decision is made in isolation. It reverberates out to all of the connected systems that are the context of the design. So create a design that benefits everyone. Create virtuous, not vicious cycles.
I feel like all of these could be extremely helpful in many of these artificial intelligence, machine learning companies that are building these platforms, or anyone in really in technology to consider when they are trying to create a community or a technology that's inclusive to all.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Actually, when we take an inclusive design approach to AI, one of the things that we frequently do within our inclusive design sessions, or one activity that I often do, is an activity called the grandparent-grandchild conversation. I don't know if you have a toddler or if you know of a toddler. There's that continuous why, the unpacking of why are we doing this? And that is a little bit of a characterization of what happened when I started to look at the inclusive design of artificial intelligence, because it prompted us to unpack not just what is happening within AI, but also being part of an academic situation. It prompted us to think about how are we dealing with evidence? How do we determine truth? Are our research methods that we're using research methods that are supportive of diversity and understanding of diversity? And you can trace the history of where we ended up with AI and with machine learning and how we're teaching our machines. It traces right back to statistical research and how we are determining what is true and what is statistically significant or what has statistical power within all of our research and academia. In terms of applying those three dimensions, diversity, supportive data, and evidence is something that has benefit for all. We have been exploring something called small, thick, bottom-up data that understands the outliers, making ourselves smarter, not just machines smarter as well. Small data is also called N equals me data or N equals 1 data. Thick data is looking at data in context. The process that we try to encourage is transparent, participatory AI co-design, inclusive process, and adding diverse perspectives. And the third dimension, understanding the complex adaptive system that we are in. If we create machines that understand and recognize diversity and have inclusion embedded in their rules and models, it will definitely benefit everyone. All of the experiments that we've done so far show that this is something that's critical, not just for people with disabilities, but for all of us. The goals that we have for artificial intelligence are better met when we don't ignore the outliers, when in fact we are diversity friendly in our knowledge and understanding. The really interesting, and this is not part of your question, but the really interesting thing that I found is that previously, when we talked about stereotypes or bias or prejudice in conversations with hard scientists or with our fellow academians, it was seen as a soft science, as something that was not easily verifiable, and therefore in the sort of hierarchy of academic rigor, it wasn't seen as something that was as well respected. But now that we can actually manifest the issues within artificial intelligence, we can show that, look at, if you don't include this data here, or if you use only the dominant patterns and you ignore the full diversity, if you base all of your knowledge and assumptions on homogeneous data or the same effect in one large data group, then you're not going to do all of the things that you hope to achieve, whether it's innovation or whether it's risk detection or whether it's better prediction or planning.
I felt like that last piece is, I think, something that employers or businesses can really take advantage and think about, right? What happens when you aren't including all people from different backgrounds, education levels, interests, and how does that impact creativity, the success of your organization, moving forward with a project? Now you have some data, maybe some research to support the case for diversity.
work itself is changing quite significantly. We still have systems and understandings that come from the industrial age when we needed replicatable workers. And that's really not the reality at the moment. If a organization wishes to survive in the current reality, then what you need an agile, diverse, collaborative team. And we've set up our AI systems and the data that we're teaching those systems, information and rules and algorithms from another era. The best way to effect the cultural change that we need within work is to create AI systems that are diversity supportive, that don't rid us of that outlying information and that don't ignore people who are at the periphery and who offer an alternative or a greater variability of skills and understandings and perspectives.
What suggestions do you have for podcast listeners, maybe who are thinking about adding artificial intelligence technology to their human resources or recruiting or workplace sort of technology stack, so that maybe they select the right one, or maybe select one that is more inclusive than the other?
So the question was what advice to give in choosing the AI and machine learning programs, like if somebody was purchasing it, is that?
Yeah, so let me give you an example. There's an artificial intelligence technology. It's a video technology, and they use AI to measure truthfulness and your body language to determine if you're happy, angry, sad, mad, if you are, what type of personality you are. So HR and recruiting leaders are seeing a lot of different types of technology that, whether it's video or sourcing technology that will pull the best candidates to the front and score them and present them to an employer. What kind of things should they be thinking about when they're looking at these technologies? Because all of them are not created equal, and they're certainly not all likely thinking about inclusive design.
The first thing that I would recommend is that you choose a system where it's apparent what the rules are and you know what set of data the system is trained on. Is the system trained on a full diversity of the types of employees that you hope to choose? Or is it trained on a homogeneous data set that has been cleaned of edge scenarios? The other thing that I would encourage you to do is to find a system where there is the opportunity for a feedback loop, where new data can be added, where you can add additional filters, or at least query the filters and remove filters that may cause bias. The other thing that I would do is to choose a system that is reactive or that is responsive to the scenario that you are working in. So not something that only gives you generic data, but that allows you to continuously adapt the system to fine-tune the working environment and the requirements that you have. And then lastly, I would encourage you to get a system that allows you to do some predictive modeling. So scenarios that may not have been found within the current data set, because as I was describing, people with disabilities or people who have been traditionally left out of a work environment will not have data that can be used for decisions. But there are ways to model current situations that were not there in the past to see, well, what would this particular skill, what would this new strategy, what would this add to the team that I have? That's the last piece that I would say, is that you want an AI system that understands a team, not an AI system that is trying to produce a set of repeatable, similar, homogeneous workers. So an AI system that can orchestrate a variety of diverse perspectives and diverse skills to make a good team within the workplace.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Where can people go to learn more about you and what you do?
They can go to the Inclusive Design Research Center website. Actually, my name is a unique identifier. So if you search for my name, many, many things will come up related to inclusive design. But our website is idrc.ocadu.ca. And to learn more about the challenges that design challenges that we've been engaging in to stretch the design of artificial intelligence to be more inclusive, you can go to bigidea.one or bigidea.one. And there we have a design challenge called Start Your Machine Learning Engines and Race to the Edge. In it, we have many different schools that are putting together edge scenarios that current artificial intelligence systems may not understand or may not have heard of or recognize. And we are using those edge scenarios to challenge the AI developers to see which one is better at encompassing the full range of human diversity.
Awesome. Well, we'll go ahead and put links to the bigidea.one and then OCAD, your program, and then as well as some other research that I have found that was pretty interesting in your work focused on inclusive design. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you.
This by far has been a really eye-opening discussion for me and hopefully for you on the subject of artificial intelligence in human resources and recruitment, and looking at some ways that this tech might identify patterns that unknowingly eliminate candidates or your employees who don't fit traditional patterns or models. While I love technology, I absolutely do, it is such an important part of what I do. We do need to push back a bit on these AI technologies in our industry and educate ourselves outside of the demos and slick marketing to really understand the things that we need to be asking more questions about. Thank you for joining the Workology podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader who's tired of the status quo. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill. Until next time, you can visit workology.com to listen to all our previous podcast episodes.
Production services for the Workology podcast with Jessica Miller-Merrill provided by TotalPicture.com.